This week on the Futurists, Thomas Frey.
When I was a kid growing up, I would see the cover of Popular Science magazine, the stuff coming out of Bell Lab, and the future was fun. I couldn't wait for the future to happen.
Welcome back to the Futurists. Of course, I'm your host, Brett King, with Rob Tercek in the hot seat. With me this week, we have a wonderful guest, Thomas Frey. He's currently one of Google's top-rated futurist speakers, award-winning engineer from IBM. He's the founder and executive director of the Da Vinci Institute. Prolific speaker. He started 17 businesses himself and assisted in the development of hundreds more. He was an engineer for IBM for over a decade. He's on the celebrity speaking circuit. He shared the stage with Rudy Giuliani, Tom Peters, Jack Welch. His clients include NASA, IBM, Lucent Technologies, Boeing, Capital One, Visa, Ford Motor Company, and so forth. And he's been interviewed pretty much anywhere you read a daily newspaper. Thomas Frey, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
No worries. Listen, Thomas, we do this little thing before we get started. Normally on the interview, we just cover off a few worthy news items that caught our eye, that it's future-focused. So, Rob, what did you find this week?
There's a couple of developments we're keeping track of, and these are topics that seem to keep coming up on the Futurists, and no doubt we'll continue to return to them in the future. The first item is a lot of folks may have the impression that NFTs have gone away with the meltdown in cryptocurrency prices that started in the beginning of this year. But that's not the case. There's actually a lot of lively development happening in the world of non-fungible tokens. And one news item that popped up this week is that Meta is now going to support the trading and sharing of NFTs across Instagram and Facebook. That means you can link your crypto wallets from a number of different providers with your social media accounts and trade there. This is not Facebook's first foray into cryptocurrency. They famously were behind a couple of initiatives to develop their own cryptocurrency, which they eventually abandoned. But it's quite obvious that Facebook sees some future use for NFTs inside of the metaverse, and this is a step toward that. So we'll keep track of that trend. The other thing that I've been paying attention to that we'll probably return to in the future episode is the impact of TikTok on social media, and it's an impact that's rippling across all of media. So even streaming media companies like Netflix are now getting affected by TikTok. There's a rising generation that prefers TikTok to any other streaming platform. Usually TikTok is left out of any kind of ranking or survey of the leading companies in streaming media. I always think that's a mistake because there's a big group that's watching TikTok. But now we're gradually starting to see the algorithmic feed that TikTok innovated being replicated on Facebook and other social platforms like Snap. And the news this week is that Google is not immune to this trend. One of the things I've noticed in a previous episode is how little Google's interface and, frankly, Amazon's interface have changed in the last 20 years. They're still very much text-based and rectangular and so forth. Well, it turns out that rectangular layout, that page-based layout of text links that you get back from a Google search isn't going to work for the TikTok generation. And so watch your Google results in the future. You'll see them responding to TikTok by integrating more media and more visuals into the search returns at google.com. That's it for me this week.
Yeah, I saw, of course, Tesla did their Optimus robot video. They're not as advanced as, say, the work that we had with, our friend Dr. Harry Kluwer, who came on with their teleoperated robot. But they've made some fairly rapid progress. Having said that, I wouldn't say it's differentiated from the whole Boston Dynamics stuff that we've seen over the last few years. So
it's true. I think Elon Musk, because he openly praised, Boston Dynamics. So at some point we need to get either one of those folks to come back on the show or folks from Boston Dynamics to talk a bit about that trend.
Yeah, he did have a funny quote about the Atlas robot, the primary Boston Dynamics, when it was doing some the parkour calisthenic stuff. He said, in a few years you're going to need a strobe light to see them move. So I thought that was a good quote. Thomas, you've been in the futurist game for quite a while. You started obviously as an engineer, But let me ask you this question to get us kicked off, if I can. What was the first moment you knew you wanted to be a futurist? Or you knew that the future you wanted to make that your life?
Yeah, I actually started the Da Vinci Institute back in '97, but it was a few years before then. I didn't really know what a futurist was, what they did, and I mean it's really kind of a profession where you kind of make up the rules as you go along. There's we've added a lot more science behind the thinking since I first got started, but yeah, even today though, even though a lot of people call themselves a futurist, there's very few people that make a full-time living as a futurist. So it requires lots of dedication, and you need to be able to validate your thinking in lots of interesting ways.
Now, you started obviously as an engineer. What aspect of this was, your love for technology, the nature, the exponential natures of technologies that we see, and just trying to extrapolate that from a trending perspective versus, what we see a lot when we talk to futurists on this show is, it was great expressed really well by Zoltan Istvan we had on the transhumanist side recently, which is futurists are trying to in a hurry to get to the future. So how much of it is the technology piece of it versus that desire to advance humanity?
Well, when I was a kid growing up, I would see the cover of Popular Science magazine, the stuff coming out of Bell Lab, and the future was fun. I couldn't wait for the future to happen. Now, if you ask the average kid on the street what they think about the future, it's more famine and disease, more wars, more things going wrong. And the news media has really done kind of a hack job on the future. So I think part of my job as a futurist is to make the future fun again.
And optimistic.
Hey, let me drill a little bit further into that. So I want to follow up on it. It's an interesting point. This topic has come up in the past, utopian futures versus dystopian futures. Certainly, Hollywood has its share to answer for in terms of portraying a dystopian future. We get that image a lot in movies.
Right.
But how much do you think that the general population, kind of the general perspective of the future, how much do you think that's a reflection of current circumstances? In other words, in an earlier era where there was a lot of widespread prosperity, let's say the 60s and 70s, people had kind of a positive view of the future. That sort of Jetsons view of the future was very popular. Today, we have income inequality. There's war, there's famine. There seems to be a general breakdown of institutions, international and national institutions. How much do you think people's view of the future is influenced by current circumstances?
Well, I think it's definitely influenced by the headlines, and you get much better clickbait if you have a negative headline.
Yeah,
I think that's problematic in a lot of ways. I don't think the future is going to be nearly as good as some people are predicting, or nearly as bad as other people are predicting. I don't believe in the dystopian side of things or the utopian side of things. It's somewhere in the middle, but at times it can kind of go off onto extremes. But I think we have a rich future ahead, and just filled with unbelievable possibilities. I think this is an amazing time to be alive. So, as an example,
why do you think that? What makes you feel like this particular moment is so great?
Because as the internet has come along, it's increased our awareness of the world around us, and that has given us insights and changed our perspective in unique and different ways. Right now, I can easily scan through as many as 1,000 headlines in a day, and I drill down on the things that I find interesting. And that simply wasn't possible even 20 years ago. And with the AI systems that are built in the background, it aligns with my interests. It lines it up with the things that I'm most interested in. So I feel I'm much more empowered than I've ever been in the past. this is there's just so many interesting things happening, and then you find that one little nugget, that one thing that kind of comes out of left field, and it might be a headline. Like I came across this headline a few days ago that Abra is going to launch the first U.S. regulated crypto bank, and I find that
I know. Bill, who's founded Abra, is a good guy.
Yeah, and then you see that headline, and then you start drilling down on the possibilities of that. Okay, how does that change things? Well, it enables the kind of the integration of lots of different cryptocurrencies into the banking system. It doesn't offer any FDIC insurance on cryptocurrencies because it's not really a currency yet. If you can load these things onto a credit card, what can you do with it? And is there ways of actually gamifying cryptocurrency in a way that it suddenly becomes normal? It feels like normal everyday life, like accumulating frequent flyer miles. You spend extra money on this credit card, then you get extra frequent flyer miles. Can we integrate things in a way where the average person on the street is using currencies in day-to-day life? And then you kind of work your way through these series of questions. And that's one of the techniques I use in the futuring world, is what I call question mapping. It's a technique where you start with the first question, which you don't know how to solve, and then you start asking a series of more and more specific questions surrounding it. You ask the who, what, when, where, how, and why questions that naturally come along with it. And then you ask, well, what came before and what came after? And then you start seeing a series of other questions that will start cropping up around all that. And that question mapping technique is really, I think, such a fascinating way of getting to an answer. It may not be a complete answer, but getting far closer to the answer than you ever were in the past.
It's true. In a way, you were just doing that. You were giving us a little demo of that. You started out with the fact that Abra is launching or you proposing to launch a crypto bank. Okay, so there's a fact. And then you started to apply some imaginative thinking. You sort of pitch some scenarios to us. Well, what might happen if that occurs? What might the impact be on banking? What might the impact be on other cryptocurrencies and so forth? I think that's a really good example of your technique. Would you describe it as is that what you do as a futurist? Is that how you operate? You start out with a big question, and then they break it down into a series of smaller questions or provable statements?
Well, that's one of the techniques. We've got a little over a dozen techniques that we've developed over the years. We've put together a course. This is our project during COVID. We put together a course called Future Like a Boss. So anybody who's interested in this, we haven't released it just yet, but very soon. So if you want to get on the mailing list, It's futurelikeaboss.com. And you can get on the mailing list. We'll let you know when it's coming out. We've got a textbook that goes along with 14 video courses, and it goes into all of these techniques that I've developed myself. Most of them are different techniques than anybody else is using, and it helps put what I refer to as anchor point in the future, that we can kind of build scenarios around those. So
are they like major inflection points or major milestones, or?
Yeah, well, let's take this technique I call firsts. So whenever a new technology comes out, let's just take the space hotel as an example. Who's going to be the first to launch a space hotel? Who's going to be the first people that are on that space hotel? Who's going to be the ones that cook the first food for a space hotel? And then you start looking at all of the things surrounding who's going to be the first paid guest at a space hotel, who's going to be the first entertainment at a space hotel. And invariably, these are all things that are very high probability items that we can refer to as anchor points in the future. We can then start building scenarios around, and I find that to be such a fascinating take. And we can do that with virtually any emerging technology, because there's always people that want to go first. That's part of human nature.
Yeah. That's a great example.
I find it interesting because you sort of describe the future. The process I find myself going through whenever I read a news item on a new piece of tech or some announcement like that. I'm always extrapolating, where's this going to take us? And I think that's the futurist mindset.
Yeah.
Right. Is that you that you're always thinking about where does that go? And I think that's the element that if you could bottle that or train people to do that, then everyone can be a lot more optimistic. But it also means that people are, we get so short-termism, don't we, as humans? We're so focused on the next quarter or the next year or the next election. And when, if we were more ambitious, I think it would just do humanity a much greater service.
Yeah.
But
people are very cautious about using imagination or applying imagination. Just last week we had an interview with Elina Hiltonen from Finland, who is a well-known futurist in Europe. And she defined futuring as facts plus imagination. And I was really happy she did that, because candidly, in the business world, people are very averse to using words like creativity and imagine. We like macho words like, innovation and ingenuity, but we're a little bit afraid of the word imagination. But what you just described actually is an incredibly useful skill. So for the people listening, what Thomas just described, that idea of asking a series of questions and envisioning possibilities, that can be used right now, today, in product development. Too often, companies are doing product development, focus on a capability, maybe some new technology that they've introduced, and they want to apply it. But they fail in building a good concept of how's the consumer going to use this. When I work with a company like that, what I try to do is get them to think like, how will you present it? Where will it be sold? What will the package look like? What will it be priced like? Who's the customer? Where are they going to put it in a shopping cart, or is it something they're going to get as a service? How do they find it? How do they buy it? How do they pay for it? How do they use it? And, some of these questions are really, really basic, but it's similar to what you're describing, Thomas, in the sense that you're causing people to think vividly and imaginatively about the scenario in which that thing is actually going to be a reality. And if you can envision it, then you can build it.
Let's use an example. You brought up earlier Boston Dynamics and their robot dog. And you start going through the scenario of, okay, what kind of capabilities does a robot dog have? Why would I, as a consumer, want a robot dog? And you start thinking about, well, dogs are for protection, and what kind of things is it protecting us from? And so you think about, does the robot dog have the ability to sense danger? Okay, well, what kind of danger? Is it danger from humans, danger from animals, danger from weather? If some disease is floating through the air, is it going to detect that? If there's some radio wave that's coming through that's that I'm going to run into somehow, is it going to protect me from that? And then you start going through these other questions like, why a dog? What do I want to be able to talk back and forth to this dog? And if I have a robot dog, do I take it everywhere I go? Does it go on the plane with me? Do I have it in a house? If I have a robot dog in a house, does that make the house more valuable? And then you just start going through the question. If I have a robot dog that runs into another robot dog, what will it do? And can the robot dog
fights now?
Yeah, can the robot dog be turned to an offensive mode? I mean, can you make it lethal? And does right bear arms give us the right to own a robot dog that's armed?
Yeah, laser turrets. Yeah.
So then that starts opening up your thinking just by asking those series of questions.
From an engineering standpoint, can you think of any times in particular you've really helped organizations change course, or you've helped a product design go in a different direction because of this type of thinking? I'm just curious. I mean,
I'm working as an advisor for a project in South Korea where they're trying to build a theme park based on future jobs.
Cool.
and it's quite the innovative project. And so not only you have to come up with what these future jobs are, you have to figure out, okay, how do we build an exhibit around it? How can somebody participate in a way that makes it interesting? How can somebody get a sense as to what the work life is going to be like in the future with this particular, and what skills are you going to need moving forward? So it opens up lots of other things that I find fascinating.
Interesting.
That's cool.
We're about to hit the break, but before we do that, Thomas, we like to do this quick fire round. Just ask you a few questions and
Okay.
just free form it. So, what was the first science fiction you remember being exposed to via TV or books?
Oh, probably a James Bond movie when I was, I don't know, 12 or so.
Oh. Name a futurist that has influenced you and why.
Well, certainly Leonardo da Vinci, but I love the work of Philip K. Dick. I mean, he was very, very influential. I mean, he lived back in the 1950s, but it was all of his thinking surrounded time travel or time thinking in some respect.
Absolutely. This is a bit of a tougher one. What do you think is the best prediction a futurist or a sci-fi practitioner has ever made?
Yeah.
That's a tough one.
Well, Elon Musk says that, and I actually said this before he did, but the human race cannot survive if all humans only live on one planet.
Yeah.
I think, and some of the talks I do ask this question: do we live on an overpopulated planet or an underpopulated universe? And it's actually the same question from a little different perspective.
Very good. And what science fiction story is most representative of the future you hope for?
One of my favorite science fiction movies is the movie Next, starring Nicolas Cage. I don't know. I think it's extremely well done.
Yeah, you like to have that few minutes of insight,
Yeah.
So you can change, calibrate in advance. Yeah, they're pretty interesting. All right, great. Well, listen, let's take a quick break. You're listening to The Futurists. I'm your host, Brett King, with Rob Tercek, and our guest is Thomas Frey this week. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsors. Provoke Media is proud to sponsor, produce, and support the Futurist podcast. Provoke.fm is a global podcast network and content creation company with the world's leading fintech podcast and radio show, Breaking Banks. And of course, its spin-off podcasts, Breaking Banks Europe, Breaking Banks Asia Pacific, and the FinTech 5. But we also produce the official Finovate podcast, Tech on Reg, Emerge Everywhere, the podcast of the Financial Health Network, and Next Gen Banker. For information about all our podcasts, go to provoke.fm or check out Breaking Banks, the world's #1 fintech podcast and radio show.
Welcome back. You're listening to The Futurists. I'm Rob Tercek with my co-host, Brett King. And this week, our guest is Thomas Frey. Thomas, thanks for joining us on the show. We've had a lively conversation so far. Now let's start to think a little bit more about the future. And frankly, what I want to understand are, what are the constraints on the future? Some folks, when they hear that we're doing this program, they say, oh, futurists, you guys just think everything goes, it's open-ended. Any kind of crazy scenario is possible. And I say, no, that's not true. There's actually hard limits. There's constraints that we know about. And within those boundaries, that's where the future is going to unfold. Can you talk a little bit about that? Tell me a little bit about your perspective on the constraints that determine the course of the future.
Yeah, I heard about a famous physicist one time that was asking this question. He said, 1,000 years from now, what things will be possible and what things will not? And I thought that was such a telling question because because we don't know what the hard limits are on the physical science. I mean, at what point can we actually see what the ultimate tiny particle is? Is there something smaller than quarks and neutrinos? Is there Is there something bigger than the universe? And so we don't quite understand where the hard limits are. I actually had an architect explain this to me one time. He was in the process of building a dome house, and he says when you're working with a dome house, he says domes are actually an optical illusion, because whenever you enter a room, your eyes inadvertently go up to the corners of the room, so you understand the space that you're in. And the same as if you're on the outside, you look at the corners of the house and you get some estimate as to how big it is. He says a dome house is actually, when you view it from the outside, it actually looks smaller than it actually is. And when you go up to the inside, it actually feels much bigger than it actually is, because you can't see the corners of the room. And that idea of going for the corners of the room, it has always struck me as such an interesting concept, because we're always trying to find the boundaries of what the limits are and that we're able to think in. And that opens a lot of doors, because see, we're a very backward looking society.
Yeah,
we're backward looking because it's just human nature. See, we've all personally experienced the past. As we look around us, we see evidence of the past all around us. Mm-hmm. In fact, all information that we come into contact with is essentially history. So the past becomes very knowable, and yet we're going to be spending the rest of our lives in the future. So it's almost as if we're walking backwards into the future. So my job as a futurist is to help turn people around, to give them some idea of what the future might hold. Yeah. And so that's where I spend a lot of time working on that. And then when you start asking the question, well, where does the future come from? How does the future get created? Well, we all participate in creating the future, but our ideas about the future, I use this phrase quite a bit. The future creates the present, which is just the opposite of what most people think. Most people think that what we're doing today is going to create the future, but from a little different perspective, it's these images of the future that we hold in our heads determine our actions today.
Yeah, it's a driver,
Yeah. So if we change somebody's vision of the future, we change the way they make decisions today. And so I use this as my justification for everything that I do, because invariably when I give a presentation, when I give a talk, people are going to walk out of the room making different decisions. And some of those decisions could be worth billions of dollars. And so that's how I justify what I do.
Okay, this is really powerful stuff. Let me recap to make sure we're on the right track, and for the benefit of the listeners. You really raised 2 points just now. One is that we're kind of doomed to sleepwalk into the future because we're mesmerized by our past. We all understand the past. We've all lived with the past. We grew up with it. Its legacy is all around us. So we're sort of conditioned to think about the past. And I guess the gap that people fall into, or the trap they fall into, is linear extrapolation from known things in the past. We try to extrapolate that into the future. And everybody knows that doesn't work, because the future doesn't unfold in a straight line. There's always different forces that affect it. So that's a kind of blind spot. And then what you're seeking to do in your talks is to kind of get people to turn their vision towards the future so that they can make different decisions today, so that they can understand that the future that we aspire to, or the future we envision, is something you can direct action towards. You can make decisions right now that are going to cause that future to unfold. Did I get it right? Is that a reasonable summary of what you just said?
Right. Yeah.
Cool. And does this make you more optimistic, do you think, as a person, having this type of viewpoint?
Yeah, it's a stepping stone to other kinds of thinking. The future is far more predictable than most people think. Like I can make quite a few predictions, high probability predictions, like the room that you're in today is still going to be around 6 months from now. I can make that prediction with a high degree of probability that the Earth's going to travel around the sun in roughly the same orbit 100 years from now. Again, a high degree of probability. That we're going to 50 years from now, we're still going to have the seasons, summer, winter, spring, and fall. Even that, if I put a handful of seeds in the ground, that a certain percentage of them are going to spring to life. All of these things can happen with a high degree of probability. And in fact, we have so many slow, stable, moving parts to our future that we can plan a birthday party 2 weeks from now and have enough stable elements surrounding it that we can actually anticipate it being able to pull that off with a high degree of probability. And so the biggest things that are most of our futures built around this stable of slow moving elements. The biggest changes happen with animals and nature and people and weather and things like that. So to the degree that we can get better at anticipating those variables, that gives us a massive edge in the business world.
I think the science fiction writer Charlie Strauss is the one who said most of the future is already here. And his point was, the streets that we drive on, the cities that we fly into, where the airports are located, that stuff's not going to change in a long time because structurally, there's a lot of development around it. There's a lot of architecture and real estate that's been developed around it. And so it's going to be very, very difficult to change it, very unlikely, barring some, catastrophic climate change incident. It's unlikely that the geography of the planet is going to change. Now, let's talk about some things that might change, because there's a lot of speculation that our hyper-connected global trading system is in an advanced stage of decay or trouble or trauma right now, starting with the pandemic, but now because of global tensions, war, and so forth, looks like the supply chain is being reconsidered. So here is probably the most complicated thing humans have ever created. This interconnected trading network. It involves manufacturing, it involves distribution, transportation, communication, like just generally all the technologies that humans have developed are integrated into the supply chain to ensure that with a reasonable degree of likelihood, there's going to be, a package of diapers or a package of coffee on the shelf of the grocery store when you go there next week. You can kind of reliably depend on that. Although in the last few years, it's been a little bit less reliable. So now we're in the radical rethink mode. You see this with computer manufacturers. Any company that depends on semiconductors is now radically rethinking where they source that supply. Tell us a little bit about changes to the existing world that are going to affect the future, because I'm quite interested in this theory.
So it's about 7 or 8 years ago, I gave a talk for the Turkish Post, and that's the postal system in Turkey. And they every year they pull together all the postal systems from around the world, and they do this kind of best practices symposium. So I gave my talk, and I started off with this one central question: how long before you can mail a package, let's say from Istanbul, and it end up in San Francisco without ever touching any human hands? Now, I find this to be quite fascinating, because when we put information into the internet routes it around and it comes out over here. It's all done automatically. How long before we can put a package into this global system and everything get routed around and it comes out over here without ever touching any human hands? And then I dove in and looked at the automated processes that we have in place, and there's always disconnects from one system to another, one country to another, and so nobody had that overarching vision of having an entire supply chain where things would just get routed around automatically. I think it's important that somebody come up with that type of vision, and then we need somebody who is a global systems architect, somebody who takes on this mission, this cause, and actually drives it home. And I find that to be such an interesting concept right now. Is in light of all of the supply chain issues that we went through during COVID, that we really need to come up with more automated systems and take the human element out of the middle of all this.
True. Yeah. This is a giant project, the automation of the supply chain. It's been underway for about 10 years. But we're at least 10 years away from seeing it realized. Partly
there's so many.
It's fully distributed. It's very decentralized. There's no one controlling authority that runs the supply chain.
But there's a lot of systems that need that sort of global design thinking. Think about air traffic control, right? Think about passport and identity management on a global basis. Medical information
all
flowing,
highly centralized, all
money
bureaucratic.
laundering, management.
All of the systems you're referring to are highly centralized. They're run by bureaucratic institutions that are highly inflexible, that have a really rigid process for change. This is where the concept of radical decentralization becomes such an interesting proposition. No guarantee it's going to work better, but it posits an alternative to these systems that we kind of take for granted. Thomas, to your point, we kind of sleepwalk or stumble into the future, assuming that the banking system we got is the best banking system we can come up with, and we therefore can't contemplate any radical change to it, or that the national standards, international standards that we have that govern the size and shape of parts, that can't be reconsidered and can't move faster. Well, when of course all those things are possible, right? With enough willpower, political willpower, and economic willpower, you could rethink any of those aspects.
The banking system, don't even get me started. But it still takes you 5 days to send money from one bank to another in the US. Yes, we're getting Fed now next year, the real-time payment system. But anyway,
so if you think about putting a base on the moon or on Mars, virtually all of our standards that we use on Earth start to go away because none of them make sense.
Absolutely.
Suddenly the day-night cycles don't make any sense. Our measure of hours and minutes don't make sense. We have different gravity there, so the weights and measurements all start getting messed up. And
capitalism.
Yeah. So
why would you need capitalism on the moon and Mars, right?
Yeah, I always think about the economy of the Starship Enterprise. They don't spend a lot of time talking about that, but it doesn't make sense. And then why should somebody that lives on the moon be governed by laws on Earth? That doesn't make any sense. So they're going to create their own laws. Well, how are they going to be different? How do they start from scratch? And it gets really interesting because all of these things.
I can see the influence of Philip K. Dick on your thinking right now. Because
this is also Kim Stanley Robinson with the Mars trilogy and stuff like that.
We interview a fair number of science fiction authors on this show. Tell me a little bit about the influence of Da Vinci, because you brought him up a couple times.
Yeah, and, I like that.
It's pretty clear you're influenced by Philip K. Dick, and that's cool with us. But now I want to understand, what does Da Vinci represent for you? Like, what was Da Vinci's role in history? What did he change?
The first futurist. Huh?
Yeah, well, Da Vinci dedicated over 35,000 words and 500 drawings to the concept of flying. At that time, nobody in their right mind was thinking that flying was possible. And in his mind, it was entirely possible. And it would take another roughly 300 years before the first moon flight and 400 years before the Wright brothers. So in my mind, this is the epitome of the true visionary. And not that many people like him, but it's kind of interesting when you actually look at all of the pieces that Da Vinci left, all the drawings and all the booklets that he created, and there's over 6,000 items that he left. And these items, when he died, they all fell into the hands of his trusted assistant, Francisco Maltzi. And Maltzi kept everything pretty much in place. But then when he passed on, it was his children that kind of started tearing things apart. And at one point, there was a sculptor that got in the middle, and he started cutting out drawings and putting them with other drawings so it made more sense. And then a lot of these codexes, the books, ended up traveling around in different ways, and then a lot of them ended up in Napoleon Bonaparte's possession for a while. And in the 1960s, some of these codexes were discovered at the library at the University of Madrid, and nobody had a clue what these were, and they were down in some basement room collecting dust. And it raises the interesting question of how many people like Da Vinci existed that we have absolutely no record of.
Yeah.
And I find that to be the biggest question of all.
Wow.
And my guess is there was quite a few of them,
like Archimedes or something. Sure, but at a time when written records may have been lost. A lot of people think of Da Vinci as a painter, and it's certainly true. With The Last Supper and the Mona Lisa, those famous paintings in the history of humanity were created by this incredibly gifted painter. He's also a sculptor. He's also an architect, but he's also an engineer.
Only 17 paintings.
Yeah, that's really remarkable,
Yeah,
but they're all
well.
masterpieces, right? But what a lot of people don't realize about Da Vinci is that he was a naturalist and a rationalist. And
Right.
most of his work is derived from observation, like
Yeah,
very close
exactly.
observation of the way a river would move. Or, he was one of the first to detect there were currents of air. And how do you actually prove that or demonstrate that? So he put his mind to thinking that. I mean, you mentioned a lot of his drawings and notes about air flight. But it's not fanciful, right? Those are pragmatic. That's the engineering mind at
Well, you
work.
could
where
even
he's-
see the helicopter. You could see probably built a paper, the helicopter prototype he sketched out. He probably built a paper model of that, like the corkscrew thing, and you could see him playing around with this stuff. But you're right, Rob.
Yeah.
A lot of it he observed. Sorry, Tom.
We got some of the first drawings of human anatomy because he would actually go out in the middle of the night and dig up graves and carve up people and draw pictures of what he's seeing. Not everybody got to do that naturally. They would have been considered grave robbers or something. But his curiosity.
What lesson can our audience take away from Da Vinci? Certainly, you mentioned curiosity, this sort of relentless curiosity and this close observation. What are some of the things that might help our audience be more future-minded from Da Vinci?
Well, yeah, with every visionary, I mean, you're a product of your time, the time and place where you live. So he had the tools that were available at that time. So he tried to do this sketch of himself, and he didn't use the best material, and so it's very faded, and there's very little of it left. I mean, creating the Mona Lisa, it had to have been redone several times, which the Mona Lisa is very likely the most expensive painting on the planet right now, if somebody is going to value it. And the reason for that is because the Mona Lisa actually got stolen. Not that many people realize it, but it was stolen in the early 1900s, and it was gone for, I don't know, 10, 12 years, something like that, and before they recovered it. And so that drew a lot of attention to the Mona Lisa. And so that was ever since then, people have had a lot of focus on that one painting.
It's astounding when you go to the Louvre. You walk down that long hallway, and you walk past half a dozen Da Vinci paintings that are each a masterpiece. No one pays attention to those because there's this giant line snaking its way into the chamber where the Mona Lisa is. And I was thinking, like, wait a minute, you're walking right past. There's John the Baptist right there.
Yeah.
Well,
not to mention the Sistine Chapel.
Yeah, it's the same in the Sistine Chapel. You walk through these corridors of just endless, remarkable artwork. Everybody wants to see what Michelangelo did. Quite impressive.
So can I ask you then to wrap up, because we are running out of time, Thomas? We at this part of the show, as we wrap up, we want to get a little bit more out there. So looking 20, 30, 50 years into the future, as the futurist you are, what do you look forward to in the future that, in terms of advancements, that humanity has the potential to make, or you think we need to make, for the future of humanity, that really excites you?
I actually give quite a few talks on this concept of designer babies. In the not too distant future, young ladies that are pregnant will have the option of going to a geneticist, and they'll have a checklist of different items that they can incorporate into their unborn child, different attributes, and you can do things like hair color and eye color and the chin shape and ear shape and things like that. Those are fairly trivial,
Nothing controversial about that. No.
No, but very likely you'll be able to create a child that is super smart, super resilient, super strong, with the super long lifespan. And so everything about this child ends up you're giving birth to a super child, and the super child grow up to be a superhuman. And then you start asking, what's the lifetime value of a superhuman?
Yeah.
Is it possible that the lifetime value of a superhuman is 100x, 100 times what the average value of a person is today? And it's interesting going down that pathway, that scenario, because then you start looking at, okay, if every superhuman's worth $1 billion in today's terms to society, or $10 billion, then countries are going to start wanting to have the most superhumans. They start paying women to have children. They'll just put them up in a resort. They'll give them a bonus once the child is born. They'll have nursemaids there helping them through everything. And then so suddenly women are going to want to start having, wow, I can have a superhuman. This becomes a whole different equation. But not everything about superhumans is going to be wonderful, because you can also give birth to a super villain. And super children growing up are going to throw super tantrums, and so they're going to challenge everything in society then. And so again, these questions start opening up the door.
Very tangential. Every time we ask a question, it's great. I love it, because we are seeing the futurist mindset in execution in real time, and that's what I like about it. So. That's fantastic, Thomas. So we've heard about the Da Vinci Institute. Where can people find out more information about the stuff that you're doing?
You can go to futuristspeaker.com, or go to futurelikeaboss.com, or futuratipodcast.com. Most of the stuff that I'm doing is on those. I write a new column every week. The column that'll go up this week will be about where the office came from, because where the office came from tells us a lot about what the office of the future is going to look like.
Oh, yeah, great. Oh, we could have a whole conversation about that. The future has deep roots in the past.
Well, listen, Thomas, it's been phenomenal having you on. I feel like we've only scratched the surface. Hopefully we can get you back on at some future date. When you have something important to say, please let us know. We'll definitely love to have you back on.
Okay, that'll be great. That'll be great.
But thank you for your work in the space, and for showing us how to think like a futurist.
All right. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, that's it for the Futurist this week. If you enjoyed what you heard, then please give us a shout out on social media. Give us a 5-star rating. Post the episodes out. We crossed over 20,000 downloads last month. So for a podcast that just started in April, that's phenomenal work, and we really appreciate the support. But please keep it going, and let us know who else you'd like to hear on the Futurists. Our thanks go out to the production team, Provoked Media, Kevin Hersham, Elizabeth Severance, Sylvie and Carlo on the social media side. And the rest of the team there. That's it for this week on The Futurist. Be sure to join us next week as we have another renowned futurist join us. But for now, we'll see you in the future.
Well, that's it for The Futurists this week. If you like the show, we sure hope you did. Please subscribe and share it with the people in your community. And don't forget to leave us a 5-star review. That really helps other people find the show. And you can ping us anytime on Instagram and Twitter at Futurist Podcast for the folks that you'd like to see on the show, or the questions that you'd like us to ask. Thanks for joining. And as always, we'll see you in the future.